Sometimes we need to share state between components. For example, let's imagine we're going to build an e-commerce application. So typically we have a navigation bar on the top where we can see the total number of items in the shopping cart. And below that, we have the shopping cart component. Now, as the user updates or removes items from the shopping cart, the number of items in the navigation bar should get updated in real time. So these two components need to share state and be in sync. How can we do this? Well, here's our component tree. So on the top, we have the app component, and below that, we have the nav bar and cart components. Now, let's imagine that we have used the state hook in the cart component to store the list of shopping cart items. Now, to share this state with the nav bar component, we have to lift the state up to the closest parent, in this case, the app component. Now that we have this state in the app component, we can share it with its children using props. So both the nav bar and cart components are going to receive the list of shopping cart items as props. Let's see this concept in code. So here in the app component, we use the state hook to store the list of shopping cart items. Now for this demo, I'm going to pass an array of strings like product1 and product2. But in a real application, instead of strings, we have product objects where each product has properties like ID, title, price, and so on. Let's not worry about those details because they're irrelevant here. So here we have a list of shopping cart items. We can store that in a variable like cart items. Now that we have defined the state here, we can pass it to the children as props. Before we do that, first we need to create a couple of components. So back in the components folder, let's add a new file called navbar.tsx. Here we use our shortcut to create a function component. Next, we need to define the shape of props. So interface props. Now here we have two options. One option is to pass all the shopping cart items here as an array. The other option is to pass only their count. What is the difference? Well, if all this component needs is just a count, it's better to pass the count. But if you need to have access to all the shopping cart items, it's better to pass all of them here, okay? So I'm going to rename this property to cart items count and set the type to a number. Now we add the props here and destructure it, okay? And then we render the number of shopping cart items, okay? We are done with this component. Now, let's move on to the next component. So we add a new component called cart.tsx. Let's create another component. Now for this one, in the props, we need to include the shopping cart items. So cart items is going to be an array of strings. Next, let's add that here. We destructure it. Next, we come here, add a UL element. Now we have a compilation error because we are returning multiple elements. So we need to wrap them inside a fragment. Okay, now let's write an expression. We grab cart items and map them to list items. So for each item, we render a list item. We give this a key, which is going to be the item itself, which is just a string. And we're going to use the item as the label as well. We're almost there. Now, let's go to the app component and add these two children. So the first one is navbar, which requires cart items count. We set this to cart items dot length. And below that, we add the cart component along with the cart items. Pretty simple so far, nothing new. Now, back to the browser. So the navigation bar is saying that we have two items in the shopping cart, and here are those items. Now, let's add a clear button in the cart component to clear the shopping cart. So back to the cart component, right after the UL, we add a button called clear. Now, what should happen when the user clicks on this button? Well, earlier I told you that we should treat the props as immutable or read-only. So we are not going to modify this object here. Instead, we need to notify the app component that the user clicked on the clear button. So all the changes to the state should be done inside this component. So as a rule of thumb, remember, the component that holds the state is the one responsible for updating it. So back to the cart component. Here in the props, we need to add a new property onClear, which is going to be a function with no parameters that returns void. Now we set onClick to onClear. We have a compilation error because I forgot to include it right here. Okay, we're done with this step. Next, we go to the app component, and here we set onClear to a function. In this arrow function, we simply call setCartItems and pass an empty array. So because this is where we maintain the state, all the updates should be done in this component. Now, by the same token, if we wanted to allow the user to remove a particular item from the shopping cart, we would have to pass a new prop here, like onRemove, which would be a function that would take a product, and then we would have to remove that product from the shopping cart items array. Okay, so let's not worry about it now. Now back to the browser. Look what happens when I click the clear button. So on the navbar, we have 0 and our shopping cart is empty. So these two components are in sync.